Hi, this is Richard Arfsten. I'm a sculptor who has been making these they're maquettes, they're little pieces of sculpture that are designed to be made with sheet metal. A maquette is a French term for model, and the purpose being to make a big piece from the design. It's just a small design. Anyways, these are very accurate, and the purpose of them is to be able to mail them to somebody all over the world who might be interested in enlarging this piece, and then they would, if they decided to buy it, they would have the option to take the thing to a fabricator in their area to have them made. It's really, really hard to move around a big piece of sculpture. The cargo box is about 8 foot by maybe 10 foot at the most. I think it's 8 foot by 8 foot by maybe 20 feet or 40 feet. Anyway, to build one of these things big, which is what I intended them, like this one here you're looking at, would really be great in front of a tall high-rise, they're really hard to move around when they're big. So the smart thing to do is build it someplace where you can get it from the manufacturer or to the installation site without too much horsing around. It's got to fit on a truck somehow. A truck is 8 foot wide, and the legal height that you can put on top of it is about 10.5 feet until you get into some special carrier things and permits and stuff like that. Anyway, that makes it quite limiting. So if you can design a piece of sculpture that can go together like a Lego block, that really helps as far as making something big. And if you notice, I take the pictures of these things from a low angle, and the idea is to give you an accurate representation of what these would look like if they were enlarged big and you were walking up to it. So anyway, that is the theory behind this. And I am not a movie maker. I'm a sculptor. So I really don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm boring everybody by talking. But when I go to an art museum, I like to pay the money to get the little talking recording device thing that you put on, and you can ask it, or it'll tell you the backstory behind the art. And this is what I like to do, is try and tell the backstory so you get some idea what's going on. So anyways, that's about it. I do most of my cutting of these pieces with a bandsaw, and what that does is it makes a surface that's in one plane. In other words, I can take a piece of sheet metal and cut it out to that particular pattern and run it through a plate roller or some kind of a way of bending it, and then weld it at the corners to the next piece. So in effect, I'm a box maker. I design these things kind of like French fries. Meaning that they're all boxes. People ask me to describe my art over the telephone when I talk to them, and that's what I tell them. Odd-shaped French fries that are glued together. So I don't know what to say as far as how to describe these things. I put sizes and titles on them. The titles to me are meaningful. I don't want them to be just pieces of abstract sculpture, because so many times you look at a piece of abstract sculpture and you say, what is that supposed to represent? You know? Well, I'm trying to give you a clue with what's going on in my mind as I'm building these things. As I build them, I really don't have any idea where I'm going. You know, I start out with a bunch of pieces on a table. Actually, they're foam pieces that I have cut on a bandsaw, and I pick them up. I start with the biggest piece first, and then I add things to them, and I use a glue that's like hot glue gun glue in a frying pan, and I control the temperature so that it doesn't get too hot. It just barely melts. I use a paintbrush, and I put some on one piece, and then I take another piece and stick to it. And what that does is it sticks it right now. I mean, it's stuck so good that I can't get it apart. I can't move it. And so that's good and it's bad, because I can't change my mind. I can't back up. I can only go forward. So anyways, and then I take this and I put a coating over it. Think of drywall compound I paint it with. And then I bury it in dry, loose sand, and I vibrate the sand to tighten it up. You know, when you go to the beach, you can walk in the sand, it doesn't deflect very much. But if you just dumped it out of a dump truck and it stood in the pile, you know, you can compress it quite a bit. Well, when you vibrate it, what happens is the little pieces lock together to a certain degree. And then I pour hot metal into it. And the process is called evaporative pattern casting. It's used in industry to make really odd forms, like the manifold on a truck. But there's 50 variables with it that control whether it's going to work or not. Things like the type of sand, what the little grain looks like, how much you vibrate it, and then you got other problems. It's called the angle of repose, and that is when you dump the sand out of the dump truck, it makes a pile, and the angle of that pile determines how the metal will flow in that pattern. When you dump the metal in, it burns out the styrofoam, and if it's not done properly, the cavity from the styrofoam falls in on itself, because actually the metal is so hot that it's burning the styrofoam before it even gets to the styrofoam. So there's a nanosecond before the metal hits the side of the sand. In regular sand casting, you make a cavity in sand and you use the sand that's got a binder in it of some sort, oil or even water, and sometimes a chemical that gets hard. But anyways, so most casting happens with filling a cavity that's an empty cavity that you're pouring the metal into. But here, there is no cavity. As I pour the metal in, it dissolves the styrofoam. And it's very, very hard to do. In industry, when they do this, they will make maybe 100 different pours. And they use a computer-operated arm to pour these things, so they can tell how fast they're pouring the metal into the mold, how deep it is in the mold, what angle of pieces in the mold, how it's going to, when it dries, the metal wants to shrink. And I have been to many events where somebody would come up to me and start questioning me, and then they would tell me, well, I'm a founder, and I'm telling you that what you're telling me won't work. It's a lie. You're lying to me. And one guy was the inventor of the coating that I paint on the outside of this, and he just flat out told me I lied, And he demanded that I tell him the secret, because nobody else can do this. There's no artist that I know of would ever work this way, because there's so many failures. I lose at least half of the pieces, and the work is in coming up with the design, Anyways, he wanted me to give away 5 years of work, making 70 tries a year, to try and figure out what these 50 variables are that you got to get right. Well, in industry, they record every time they make a pour, and you only learn when the thing fails. And once it fails, now you have to examine it and try and figure out, why didn't that work? Well, what if I would do this a little different? What if I would do that? So I guess that's part of my makeup. I like to solve problems. And that's what this is, this process. It's complete frustration, but it's also complete exuberation when it comes out right. I mean, when I pull this thing out of the sand and it works, I'm jumping up and down happy. If you are interested in what these things cost and little backstories behind each of them, there's a couple sites up above that talk about this. Saatchi has the backstories and the prices, but it's a hard site to navigate. The other one, Arfsten up there, has a few words about each piece, not much, but it's a real easy site to navigate around, and it's organized. So if you have a desire to see more of my work, you can get a fast overview on Arfsten. Thanks for taking the time to look at my work. Have a good day and a better tomorrow.